Hello everyone. Today we are doing the muscular system lecture. I'm going to break it up into a couple of smaller chunks. So this first chunk is on the hierarchy of organization. Remember, hierarchy means smaller things making bigger and bigger things to keep things nice and organized. We'll also go over some of the specialized structures found only in the skeletal muscle cells. Because they are so highly modified for their very specific function of contracting, which means to shorten, all of those structures get special names. So we'll go through all of those together. And then next time, I'll talk about things like origins and insertions and talk about fascicle arrangements. And you're going to learn what a fascicle is in a minute. And then talk a little bit about leverage in bones. So let's start with the general functions of the muscular system. Mostly it's just for movement. All muscle tissues contract. Contract means to shorten, and that generates movement within the body. Usually we think about movement of the whole organism structure, so that's generally called locomotion. But there's also things like moving fluids around, using things like peristalsis, moving urine from place to place, regulating blood flow, moving food through the GI tract. And then there is a function of regulating temperature, so that when you're shivering, all those are small little contractions of the muscle, which release a little bit of heat, which collectively can warm up the body. But the major function of the muscular system is contraction for movement. If hopefully you remember back to your lecture on different types of tissues, there were 3 different types of muscular tissues. Do you remember what they are? We have cardiac muscle cells, and cardiac muscle cells are found in the heart. So cardiac means heart. And what they do is they contract to coordinate pumping the heart, which moves blood throughout the body. Then we have smooth muscle tissues, which are found in hollow organs such as the stomach, the small intestine, also found in blood vessels for regulating the diameter of the blood vessels to regulate blood flow, and things like in the bladder, any of those hollow organs, uterus, those places too. So what we're going to focus on today is the skeletal muscle tissue, and it's called the skeletal muscle because it attaches to the skeleton and it pulls on the skeleton to create movement in the body. By the way, remember that organ systems are collections of organs, and so the muscular system also has a collection of organs, and so that includes things like the biceps brachii, right? So this is the biceps brachii. These muscles, these individual muscles, they're considered organs because they're collections of different types of tissue that kind of go towards one particular function. So most of us think of organs as things that are like inside the body, but remember they can be they don't have to be inside. If it's a collection of tissues that has a particular function, that is an organ. Okay, now into hierarchy. Okay, so remember we're going to try to go from smaller things towards bigger things, and think about how that helps organize and coordinate the contraction. Let's start off with a muscle cell. Muscle cells are called muscle fibers. And the reason they're called muscle fibers is because instead of being a circular structure like we typically think of when we think of cells, they're very, very long cells. And so if you think about what they look like in the microscope, if you were to tease an individual muscle cell apart from all the other cells, what you would get is a long fiber. It looks like a fiber. So if you look in the microscope and you see those long fibers, well, you might just call them muscle fibers. And then later you find out that, well, those are the cells. So that is why they're called muscle fibers. When I say the word fiber, I'm talking about the muscle cells. And then surrounding an individual muscle fiber is an endomysium. What does endo mean? Endo means inside. So around one specific muscle fiber, you have a layer of connective tissue to protect it. That is the endomysium. And then from those muscle fibers, they organize and collect so that they all are running parallel. If you remember when we looked at the histology of the muscle fiber, of the muscle tissue, it was just long cells running in parallel to each other. So to help keep them running in parallel, you take a group of muscle fibers and you bundle them all together and you create what's called a fascicle. So a fascicle, so here, these structures here, each of those are fascicles. So here's one fascicle, which is a collection of muscle fibers. And to keep them organized and to protect them, you surround them with another connective tissue layer, which is called the perimysium. Remember MY, if you see MY, MY means muscle. So mysium relates to muscle. What does peri mean? Peri as in perimeter, around the outside. So those fascicles will be surrounded by the perimysium, mysium muscle, peri around one fascicle. And then those fascicles are further collected into a full organ, the whole thing, which is called the skeletal muscle here. And then that skeletal muscle is wrapped yet again with another connective tissue layer, which is called the epimysium. And remember, epi means outermost, most superficial, on the outsides. That is the epimysium. Okay, so here we have these very long cells bundled and organized and bundled and organized and bundled and organized again. Okay, so make sure they all run nice and parallel to each other. Okay, and you can see this when you look at meat, because meat is skeletal muscle. When you look at the meat, for example, here we have some delicious looking steak. Those strings that you see, those are the fascicles running lengthwise. So you have a collection of muscle fibers all running in one particular direction. Those are fascicles. If you cut it through from a longitudinal section, you'll end up with circles, and those circles would be the longitudinal section through a fascicle. So there's a fascicle, there's a fascicle. And so it takes on this texture because of the organization of the muscle fiber cells into those fascicles. So those are fascicles. So make sure you think about that when you're eating your food. Okay, so what was the name of that connective tissue layer that surrounded a single muscle fiber? So just one cell. Innermost cell would be an endo. Endo means inside. Mysium is muscle. So endomysium, around one single cell, one single muscle fiber. Now, when you think about this, I want you to relate this information that you learned back to bones, right? Because you're going to see some similarities there. What was the name of that connective tissue layer that surrounded the medullary layer inside the cavity? That was the endosteum. Endosteum. Okay, so endosteum, inside osteum, bone. So what? So that would be the endosteum. What about around the outside of the whole bone? That's the periosteum. Okay, so you're going to see sort of same type of prefixes lining for the same sort of idea. Okay, so again, endo is inside, peri around, epi is outermost. You're going to see it again when we get to nerves. So, you know, make sure you get that piece. Okay, so now let's look inside of the muscle fibers. Okay, so the inside of the muscle fibers, we got a lot going on because remember the job of these muscle fibers is to shorten. And in order to shorten, they have to have a very highly modified cytoskeleton to pull and move across so they can get that contraction. So remember here we have this is what it looks like under the microscope. Here's one cell, another cell, and another cell, and they are striated. We're going to get to where that comes from in a bit. Now, inside there, it is absolutely just packed with these long myofibrils. Okay, so here, if you look at this picture right here, here is one full muscle fiber. Okay, so one full cell right here. You can tell here are the nuclei. So one single cell there. And then running inside, we have packages of these long protein fibers. Okay, those protein fibers, excuse me, are called myofibrils. Myofibrils is just a collection of the protein fibers, and those protein fibers are made up of myofilaments. So the individual protein strings, those are myofilaments, and you have thick ones, also known as myosin, and thin ones, also known as actin. They are then bundled and collected together to create one myofibril. Okay, so let's go through it again because that's a bit confusing. So here we have one full muscle fiber, one full cell. There are the nuclei for the cell. If you look at it, you're going to see a collection of myofilaments. So here is a protein string, so long strings of protein, actin or myosin. They are then bundled together to create one myofibril, and then those myofibrils are then bundled inside of one muscle fiber. So later on in the lecture, I'm going to give you an opportunity to review all that and try to put them in order from smallest to biggest. Okay, now we need to talk about those striations. Okay, so remember when you look at the muscle tissue, you have these stripes, and those stripes are called striations. And the reason they have striations is because those myofibrils, here's a myofibril, they are organized with repeating subunits, and those repeating subunits are called sarcomeres. Okay, so a sarcomere is one repeating unit within one full myofibril. So if you're looking at this picture right here, here is one myofibril. Okay, so one group, one collection of myofilaments. And in that, we have repeating units, which are seen from here to here. There's one sarcomere, there's another sarcomere, and then another, right? So we have repeating units of sarcomeres. And the sarcomeres are going to be the unit of contraction. So for those of you going on to physio, you're going to hear that a lot. So you have contraction, shortening of each sarcomere. So we have the sarcomere here, but you'll notice that within the myofibrils from one to another, so here would be another myofibril, a different myofibril, and here on this side is a different myofibril. If you look at it, it is so very highly organized that each sarcomere stacks on top of the sarcomere beneath it of a different myofibrils. So if you're looking for striations, what you see is the light band and the dark band, and the light band and the dark band, and that creates the striped appearance of the entire cell. Okay, so those are the striations, and each independent unit is a sarcomere, and the sarcomeres repeat next to each other to create myofibrils, and then those myofibrils fill up the inside of the muscle cells, the muscle fibers. Good. So in physiology, if you do go there, they're going to talk about how it contracts. So if we have here to here is one single sarcomere, and the sarcomere is the smallest piece that contracts. And so what happens is when all of the sarcomeres shorten at the same time, that's going to make it so that the entire muscle cell shortens at the same time, and then that makes it so that the whole muscle shortens at the same time, and that's what's going to create the shortening of the entire muscle cell. So if you're interested in that, you'll look forward to seeing that in physiology. So what I want you to do right now is pause the video, and I want you to get a piece of paper and try to put in order these structures here from smallest to biggest. And then when you come back, I'll go over the answer there. Okay, so welcome back. Now let's talk about it. So we have the first piece would be myofilaments. And remember, those myofilaments are thick filaments or thin filaments, also known as actin or myosin filaments. And when you take a group of myofilaments, remember the myofilaments themselves are the long strings of protein. So just long fibers inside. When you take a group of myofilaments and collect them together, you bundle them to create a myofibril. And then those myofibrils are going to be bundled inside of a muscle fiber, which again is the name of the cell. And then when you bundle those muscle fibers, you create a fascicle. And then when you bundle a fascicle all together, you'll create one full whole skeletal muscle. So you have the whole skeletal muscle. And that's the full organ. Now, the other thing I was hoping you could do is think about where those connective tissue layers would be. If you have an endomysium is going to be found right here. Okay, so the endomysium would be surround one single muscle fiber, endomysium. Then surrounding a whole fascicle, we have one perimysium. Peri means around a whole fascicle. And then surrounding and protecting an entire an entire skeletal muscle, which is the whole thing, that would be the epimysium. Okay, so you got a myofilament creating a myofibril, creating a muscle fiber, creating a fascicle, then creating the whole muscle cell. And if that was too fast for you, go back to the beginning of the lecture and watch it again. Okay, so we just have a couple more things that we need to talk about. Let's talk about some of the specific specialized structures for those muscle fibers. Again, because muscle fibers have such a specific job and they're very highly modified to be very good at their job, they also have special names to go with those very highly modified structures. So on the surface, which would be the plasma membrane, so the outer membrane, the outer layer, the outer boundary of the cell, that would be called the sarcolemma. And you're going to notice that there's a lot of sarcos in these names, and that's because sarco means flesh, and flesh is like muscle of the body. So we have sarcolemma on the surface, and then those sarcolemma structures have these invaginations, which just means it goes down into, like kind of dips down, like a little valley into the cell and comes back up. Those are called T-tubules or transverse tubules. Transverse as in cuts it in the transverse plane. So if you take a cell and you cut it in half, that's the transverse tubules. And then surrounding around the outside of the transverse tubules, you have a network of membrane, which is a modified endoplasmic reticulum. And this one is primarily to store calcium, which is going to be used as a signaling molecule for contraction. And in that sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that network is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So it's like a modified endoplasmic reticulum, but it's the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so to review, sarcolemma on the surface, T-tubules going down into it, and then surrounded by the sarcoplasmic reticulum, sometimes referred to as the SR. You're going to talk a lot about how you create contraction if you do go into physio, so I am not going to talk about it in anatomy, and your textbook goes into this kind of a little bit too much, and so I really suggest that you just skip that whole section because we don't need to focus on it, and it's pretty technical. So that's it for this lecture. You can continue on to the fascicle arrangement lecture, and then we'll talk about bones after that. Bye-bye.